Good morning, friends, and welcome to another Friday Facebook Live. I'm Taylor, this is Nick. We are joining you from our beautiful Olympic Coast Sanctuary tank. Nick wanted to be sure to wish everyone a hearty and happy fall. And we hope that you're settling into new school and work routines. Tonight marks another Aquarium After Dark extended hours. And in honor of that, we thought we would again talk a little bit more about tonight's theme. Tonight's theme is going to be sustainable seafood. So if you're joining us tonight, you can learn a little bit more about some good sustainable seafood choices and some tasty recipes for cooking up those sustainable seafood choices. But today, Nick and I thought it might be beneficial to review some of the basics of sustainable seafood and just why it is so important to choose sustainable seafood.
I think that's a good idea, Taylor. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Sustainable seafood does have some major impacts on ocean health, and so we thought we would go over a little bit about why that is this morning, and hopes that you can maybe learn a little bit more tonight, and then all of us can work together to move towards the problem of solving some of these issues that are caused by overfishing and bycatch. So I think we're going to go over a little bit more about exactly what overfishing and bycatch means. Nick, would you like to start us off?
I certainly would. If this is going to be hard, I'm going to be distracted by all the cool fish moving behind us during this presentation. But thank you, Taylor. I will start by talking about some of the basics as it relates to fish and humans, because we do have a very important relationship. So basically, fish have been a really important food source for humans ever since we evolved from our primate relatives. After meat and grain, fish and other types of seafood are the third most major source of food for humans all around the world. And in some areas, particularly coastal areas of countries or regions like Africa and Asia, it's basically the only source of animal protein that humans are eating. It's seafood, fish, things
Super
that come.
important.
What's that?
Super important.
Super important. So basically, ever since, fish have been a really important source of food for humans. Now, originally, fishing looked a little bit different than it does today. Think small wooden boats, fishing poles, hand-tossed nets, and in some areas of the world, those fishing tools are still used as the primary method to harvest things from the ocean. But humans are very good at improving technology and coming up with new ways and more efficient ways of doing things. And these days, our fishing methods have improved quite a bit, changed quite a bit. So now we're able to utilize gas-powered ships with mile-long nets that they can haul in, and thanks to refrigeration, ships that can stay out for weeks at a time to fish, right? So that's really allowed us to increase the amount of fish that and seafood that we're able to take from the ocean at one given time or during one given fishing trip. Now, paired with the fact that us humans have also been increasing our population here on the planet, that has also been matched with an increased demand for more seafood. So if we like the seafood, and if there are more humans, then there's going to be more seafood. How do you feel about that? Maybe not so great, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. So more humans, more seafood. We need more of this seafood. It's so tasty. We love it. These things are kind of cruising towards a problem here, and Taylor's going to start by talking a little bit about the first sort of area of that problem. Yeah.
So I think when us humans look out at the ocean, it looks so big and so vast that there is this misconception that we can just go on harvesting seafood and other fish at an endless rate. Like you can just keep taking and the ocean will never run out. And unfortunately, that is absolutely not the case. So with increases of the rate of fishing and the efficiency with which we take those fish out of the ocean, we've run into this problem called overfishing. So overfishing is defined as taking more fish or seafood from the ecosystem than that ecosystem can naturally produce. And this has a little bit to do with fish reproduction. So essentially, for us to be able to keep taking fish from the ocean, fish have to reach adulthood, have healthy offspring. Those offspring have to reach adulthood and then have an opportunity to reproduce themselves. And essentially what overfishing does is it kind of short circuits that cycle of reproduction and healthy offspring. Or to use a Nick-friendly analogy, it's like taking too many cookies from the cookie jar and not giving enough time for somebody in your life to make more cookies to replenish the cookies in the cookie jar.
That sounds right to me.
Yeah, it's all about time. And if you don't give it enough time, you end up with a very empty cookie jar and a very sad Nick Piapi.
Nobody wants that.
Nobody
right?
wants that. So that is the problem of overfishing, is not giving the ecosystem enough time to rebuild itself before you take more out.
Awesome. Well, not awesome, but that was an awesome description
Thank you.
of the basics. Yeah.
Nick's just thinking about cookies now.
That's actually very true. I am thinking about cookies. Yeah. Okay, so with the problem of overfishing that Taylor just eloquently described for us, there are other associated issues, and one of the other major associated issues is has to do with the fact that with all of this overfishing going on and these improvements in gear, which allow us to take more seafood from the ocean at one given time, well, efficiency is good. It is important for our fishermen to be able to go out and have to spend less effort to catch their goals. That's a good thing for everybody. Unfortunately, one of the consequences of these gear improvements, creating bigger nets that allow us to take more things from the ocean at one time, is that this gear isn't always as selective as we want it to be. For example, let's say a fisherman or a fisherwoman is out on the ocean and they're targeting a species like Atlantic cod or shrimp. If they are using gear like a big net to haul in those species, they might be accidentally taking other species, the wrong species, a non-targeted species. They might be taking the wrong sex or the wrong size of a particular type of animal that they're targeting. And this accidental catch is referred to as bycatch, when you're trying to target one species, but you're accidentally taking something else as well. Bycatch is not something that these accidentally caught animals are always able to survive. It can often cause either immediate mortality or delayed mortality or other impacts as well. So bycatch is also an associated problem with overfishing.
Yeah, so overfishing and bycatch unto themselves can have some pretty dire consequences for individual species or entire ecosystems, but it also has an impact on overall ocean health due to some of the animals that are impacted in specific ways. Now, what I'm thinking of are our predators. So bycatch, sharks often are one of those species that end up as bycatch. Typically, we're not targeting sharks, but they end up in our fishing nets because they're going after similar species that we are. Things like grouper and tuna can also end up in this category as well as important predators. And what predators do for an ecosystem is they help to keep populations in balance. So the prey items that they eat, they take those individuals out of the population, and this helps keep that population from kind of overrunning that ecosystem. Inversely, they also go after sick and diseased fish and actually remove those unhealthy individuals from the population, helping to keep those populations balanced and also super healthy. Kind of on the flip side of that, we also see animals that are struggling because we've taken too much of their prey out of the ocean. And in this case, we're thinking about things like penguins and seals and large marine mammals like whales. We go after things like herring and mackerel and sometimes krill. These probably sound familiar to you because we eat them, but these are also the prey items that these animals are eating. And if we're taking too many out of the ocean, this means they have to go longer or farther in order to find those food items, and this can be really detrimental to their health, but also to things like feeding their offspring. So there are some ripple effects that happen due to not using sustainable fishing practices, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about it so much today, so that you could really understand kind of the foundation for why our choices impact ocean health overall when it comes to the food we eat.
Absolutely. Another eloquent description there, Taylor. That was great.
Thank you very much.
So I think at this part of the presentation, Taylor, maybe we'll stop and see if there are any questions from our visitors out there.
Perfect.
Does anybody have any questions about overfishing or bycatch or ocean health, any of the things that you heard us discussing? Feel free to add them to the comments section on Facebook. Marissa, how's it looking out there? We have anybody awake and sending us questions? I hope so.
Is there a limit to the number of fish that you can catch? That's a great question, and the answer is yes. So there are entire agencies at the federal, state, and local level that govern things like catch quotas, and they essentially tell fishermen how much of a certain species during a certain season or a certain type of year that they can take out of the ocean. Now, this is kind of where scientists come in. They do research about populations and things like rate of reproduction and really understanding the biology of fishes so that we can make informed decisions about what that catch number should be. And this also varies greatly between like recreational fishermen and commercial fishermen, different areas of the world, etc., different species of fish. So there's a lot of things that kind of factor into that. But yes, there absolutely are catch quotas.
That was amazing.
Thank you.
You crushed that answer. I've got nothing else to say to it.
Is farming a better option for buying seafood?
Great question. Is
farming
a better? Do you want to take that one, Nick?
I'll try this one.
All
Yeah,
right.
is farming a better option for seafood? So the answer to that one is maybe. Yes and no. There are certainly cases where a particular species is being farmed in a sustainable manner, and choosing a farmed version of that animal is better than taking something from the wild, but it is not the case across the board. It depends a lot on the type of practices that are used for farming. And I'll try to give you guys a couple of examples, and Taylor can help me out with this. Let's say we're talking about an animal like shellfish, like clams or oysters. They are actually, in general, farmed very sustainably. Some of that has to do with the fact that their needs as organisms aren't quite as complex, and also just by having them present in an ecosystem, they actually add a lot of positives. They do things like filter the water, keep the water quality very high. Again, like I was mentioning, as long as you set up an appropriate habitat for them with good water conditions, water temperatures, and you allow them to do their best to filter and eat food on their own. You don't often need to provide them with food. They will filter food from the water naturally. But if you set up conditions right for a shellfish farming area, then they are just going to grow on their own, more or less. And you don't have to add a lot of effort. You don't have to provide them with more food. You don't have to worry about any pollutants as a result of farming them. And so again, in general, shellfish farming is a very sustainable practice, and choosing farmed versions is better than taking them from the wild. Now, there are other examples of species in other parts of the world where it's different. And again, sometimes it also depends on where in the world they're being farmed. For example, let's take salmon, and there are lots of different species of salmon.
Great example.
Right?
Yeah.
And actually, salmon farming is a very complicated one. I don't know that I could eloquently describe all the intricacies of it during this presentation. Pardon me. I dropped my notes. But basically, salmon are found on the west coast, on the east coast, but they are farmed all over the world, and they are native to other areas of the world too. I was referring kind of just to the U.S., but farming techniques for salmon are a little bit more complex. You need to provide them with different types of food at the different stages of growth. They also need to be sort of sequestered in areas where they're not intermingling with wild populations, so as not to potentially spread disease or add a lot of waste products to the natural environment. It is a more complicated system to farm salmon, and therefore There are some areas of the world where they're getting it just right, but there are other areas where they're just not quite there yet, and they're working on it. And so it depends a little bit on where you're getting your farmed salmon from. There may actually be some instances where choosing a wild version of a particular salmon species is more sustainable than choosing a farmed version. Anyway, it's way more complicated than that. We always recommend, Taylor, when you're making your sustainable seafood choices, and you're actually going to learn a little bit more about that, those of you that are attending tonight, but that you look for resources that are available to you that involve organizations that study all of the aquaculture and seafood farming that's going on and come up with informed and educated determinations about what good choices are depending on various variables that they use to measure things. There's apps that you can download to your phone. There are organizations that you can look up online that have these great seafood guides. There are a lot of resources that are available to you when making those choices. And a lot of times when you go to the supermarket, you'll see a stamp on that seafood that will indicate that it has been reviewed by a particular organization and approved. And I'm clearly heading off into the distance here with a long-winded answer, so I'm just going to cut myself off right here.
Yeah, I think the short answer is there isn't a simple answer for sustainable seafood. Whether it's coming from the wild or whether it's in a farmed situation, you kind of have to just do your research and learn a little bit more about kind of the way that it's done, how it's raised, how it's caught, and the impacts that have on the ecosystem around it.
Why didn't I just say that?
Because it's way easier to sum it up after you explain
Oh,
it.
boy. Anyway, sorry about that, guys.
Do we have any other questions out there?
So if I'm at a restaurant, is there an easy way to know if there are sustainable options on the menu? Any types of fish or words we should be looking for?
Absolutely, that's a great question. The answer we typically give for this is to first ask the restaurant, because they're the ones that purchase the seafood, and they should know, where it might just say like pollock on the menu. They're going to know where that pollock came from, probably how it was caught. And if they don't know, it also encourages them to find out, because if those restaurants are making responsible seafood choices, it also helps us make responsible seafood choices. But typically the amount of seafood a restaurant is going to buy over a year is probably way more than the amount that you're going to buy over a year, and they can kind of use their buying influence in that way. So ask the restaurant. If they have no clue, there are resources that you can find easily online. One that we like to reference a lot was created by the Monterey Bay Aquarium in conjunction with some others using aquariums and also some other organizations that help do things like study sustainable seafood options. It's called Seafood Watch, and you can download it right to your phone, and then it's like having that guide right in your pocket at all times.
Are there any types of seafood we should specifically avoid?
Any types of seafood we should specifically avoid?
Yeah, so again, this is a little bit of a complicated question to answer, because there's a lot of different types of seafood out there to choose from. And like we were sort of describing, there's sometimes farm versions of things and wild versions of things. I'm going to try to give some examples here.
Top three?
Top three, maybe? Yeah, of good choices to make. Does that sound?
Or ones?
Or ones we should avoid. That was the question, ones to avoid? Okay. I would put at the top of the list bluefin tuna, I guess, maybe? Would that be a good one to put up there?
Tuna is definitely high up there of the most consumed seafood choices in the U.S. So most consumed meaning there's a lot of pressure on that industry. So if you can choose something else, you help take a little bit of pressure off that industry.
Sure.
Do you remember what the other two are?
Oh, I see what you're going for here. Ah, I missed Taylor's cue. I do remember what the other two are. A second one that we were just talking about is salmon. And it's not because every species of salmon is a bad choice, as I was describing in my long-winded answer. There are some wild and some farm types of salmon that are good choices right now, but in general, the overall pressure on salmon in the U.S. is very high. A lot of us are eating salmon. It's in those top three in terms of most eaten types of seafood. And so again, just choosing something else takes some of the pressure off salmon species and allows them to replenish their populations. There's two. And three.
Shrimp. Shrimp is another really, really common seafood. In fact, I think shrimp is the most consumed seafood in the United States. But shrimp, salmon, and tuna, make up more than half of all of the seafood that we eat. in the US.
Yep.
So if you can just avoid shrimp, salmon, and tuna and choose something else, particularly something maybe more local that you know came from a local fisherman in a sustainable way, those are great options. And again, this just requires a little bit of research on your side, but it makes a big impact for our oceans.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that is probably good for now because we could just go off on another long tangent here.
If you have more questions, it is Sustainable Seafood Month.
It sure is.
And our resident experts are looking for questions from our viewers to be able to answer those for you. So put them in the comments and we will forward them to the experts.
Yes.
How about that?
Indeed. That sounds like a plan. Okay, so we'll wrap things up right now, I think, Taylor.
Yes.
Hopefully, again, you guys will add any additional questions that you might have. Just a couple things to mention in conclusion. Number one, I want to say that the sole responsibility for problems like overfishing and bycatch does not lie with the people that are responsible for harvesting seafood from the ocean. I want to make sure that it's clear that fishermen and fisherwomen are doing their best to follow rules and regulations that are set forth by lawmakers and resource managers, but it has become a very complicated system in the US for managing our fisheries. And so it's tough. And the responsibility really, because it's a global problem, it lies with all of us. We all share a little bit of the responsibility in problems like this. Second, there may have been a little bit of a sort of a down tone to this presentation, but there is good news here as it relates to problems like overfishing and bycatch. And the good news is that because we all share a little bit of a responsibility in problems like this, we can all get together in our communities, in our cities, in our countries, as a world population and address these problems together. And it starts, like we've been talking about, by promoting and choosing sustainable seafood. And those of you folks that are going to be attending Aquarium After Dark Hours are going to learn a little bit more about that tonight. But if you're not going to attend tonight, you may have heard Taylor just mention that it is also National Sustainable Seafood Month, October. And so this is a great time to learn more and educate yourself. We actually have a video series that we've been presenting through the aquarium on our social media platforms called the Blue Planet Science Series. And it features our sustainable seafood and aquaculture team talking about some of their work. So we definitely encourage you folks to go check out those videos to learn a little bit more.
In fact,
Taylor,
I think this week was all about aquaculture.
Oh, it was.
So for the individual that was asking specifically about aquaculture, you can learn all the ins and outs by checking out Matt's video from our Blue Planet Science series this week.
That's right, yeah. And you know, there's something else that's happening in our country right now, Taylor. I think, are we coming up on an election?
Yeah,
Is that...
I think that's just like right around the corner.
Huh.
In fact, I think some people are already voting, Nick.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that seems like a great opportunity to use our voting power to support legislation and legislators that vote and support protecting our environment, protecting our oceans, keeping them healthy places. So use your voting power to have an influence with who we put into power and what kind of laws we adopt that can help to protect our oceans. That's another great thing you can do as well. This can make a huge impact for the future of our oceans. So, we hope that you guys will all join us in doing our part to keep the oceans a healthy place. And we also hope that you will continue to tune in for future Facebook Lives where you can do some more learning and have some fun as well.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for tuning in. Hope you guys have a great Friday and a great rest of your weekend. And if you're coming tonight, we'll see you tonight.
Awesome. Bye,
Adios.
friends.